Hello, and welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 47, Competition Repertoire Guides with Peter Senchuk. The Straubinger Flute Company is a sought-out maker of fine flutes and pans. Located in Indianapolis, Indiana, the company celebrated their 50th anniversary in 2018. The Straubingers contribute to the community with new ideas, concepts, and raise the bar to new heights for all flutists. Straubinger flutes are known for their brilliant mechanism, beautiful tone colors, and outstanding craftsmanship. If you would like more information about Straubinger flutes, please visit their website at straubingerflutes.com. Welcome everyone to another Flute 360 podcast episode. Today we are talking with Peter Senchuk about his sonata for flute and piano. It's a repertoire requirement of NFA's Convention Performers Competition. More specifically, the NFA is requiring part 2 of Peter's sonata. Welcome, Peter, to the show.
Oh, thanks, Heidi. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So how are you this morning?
Doing okay. We're all a little sad out here in LA that the Rams lost yesterday in the Super Bowl, but we got to soldier on, I guess.
Yeah. I will admit, I am not a football fan.
Okay, yeah. It was kind of a big thing out here, so we are all a little down this morning, but, it's raining, so we can't say it's a sunny Southern California day, but we just got to keep moving, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, man. Did they get creamed what was the score?
13-3. So it was a super low scoring game, and it wasn't a good game, even if they would have won. It wasn't a very exciting game to watch. So it's fun to get together with friends and have, food and some drinks, but the game was a disappointment. Yeah,
I heard through social media, everyone was doing all these frowny, emojis and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, that did not sound entertaining.
It was not. Yeah. And especially when you lose, it's really not entertaining.
See, it's a problem when I live in Texas and I don't like football.
Yes, because that's the home of football,
Yeah, but see, I'm originally from Chicago.
Okay.
That's my excuse.
Okay, I see. So it's not in your blood that, Texas football culture.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. So where are you currently living?
We're in Culver City, California, which is just kind of on the west side of LA, right by Santa Monica.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And you're originally from Canada.
I am. I'm originally from Windsor, Ontario, which is right across the river from Detroit. And, I grew up there. And then we, after me and my wife got married, we lived in Detroit for a couple years while we finished up our undergrad. And then we moved out here. And we've been here. It was funny. We just yesterday at the Super Bowl party, we were talking about a friend who I was at SC with. And it's going to be 21 years this year that we've been out here now. So it's been a while. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
You must love it.
We do. It's all the, the typical things you've heard about LA. Traffic's bad, it's hustle and bustle. But, we live on the west side, so our weather is always, 75 degrees. And if you don't leave the west side, the traffic isn't that bad. So, and it's like anywhere else. You grow into the community here and, it's kind of like you can't think of leaving,
Yeah. Well, that weather does not sound like something I would complain about.
Yeah, that's the one thing, when people start complaining about, all the driving you have to do and just kind of the expense of it out here. But it's like our son, he basically wears shorts all year round to school. So it's easy to get used to and hard to leave, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, since your piece is on the NFA's competition list, I would love to pick your brain about your sonata and see what you would like to share with the listeners.
Oh, yeah, that'd be, I'd love to do that.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
So before we dive into that specific piece, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, anything you'd like to share.
I guess like we were just talking about, I grew up in Windsor. I started playing violin when I was 5. You know, my parents didn't really force me. I guess I wanted just to play violin for some reason. And, you know, my parents were both school teachers, so we had music in the house, but we weren't extremely musical family. It's not like one was a concert master of the local orchestra or anything like that. So I played violin all the way until grade 6. And that's when, in our school district, is when we had the opportunity to start playing in band. And it's funny. It's a funny story I tell my students. I wanted to play either trumpet or alto saxophone because I thought those are the instruments that get the melody, and they are the instruments that get the melody. But the band director kind of forced me to play trombone because he said, you know, you play violin, so you have a good ear because it's a lot of the same concepts of the slide. And the strings are the same. There's no marks to where to put your fingers. There's no marks on the trombone where to put the slide. So he made me take the trombone home, and I think my mom even wrote a letter to him saying, you know, oh, he really doesn't want to play trombone. But my teacher said, oh, just stick it out for the first month. And I remember I took it home and I learned my B flat scale that first night, and it just stuck with me from then on. So from grade 6, I started playing trombone, and that's my instrument. I went through undergrad as a jazz studies major at Wayne State University in Detroit on trombone. And while I was there, I played in the Jazz Tet, which is kind of the top jazz combo. I was lucky enough to start doing that as a freshman. And one of the requirements that they do for the Jazz Tet there, at least when I was there, was the members had to write all the material. So even though I was kind of a freshman, I hadn't had any really formal theory. I had taken some theory in high school because I did go to a school of the arts, but nothing like college level stuff, and definitely not jazz theory and jazz harmony. I was thrown in, and the professor was like, no, if you're going to be in the group, you got to contribute as well. So I kind of had a crash course in learning how to arrange tunes and write, you know, head charts and backgrounds and that kind of thing. And that slowly just evolved while I was there. We had a really great composition professor, James Hartway, who was there. And it was a requirement of the jazz studies major. You had to take one semester of composition. And I did that with him. And I just started falling in love with just the idea of composition. And I ended up getting a double major. So it was jazz studies and composition. And then after that, we stayed in Detroit for a couple of years. My wife and I were both playing, you know, just gigging musicians, playing everything from orchestral music, brass quintets, a lot of jazz for me, a lot of big band gigs, a lot of Detroit being the home of Motown, doing a lot of horn stuff for a lot of the oldie acts, you know, from the heyday of Motown. And then we were deciding, well, where are we going to go to grad school? And it was kind of my thought had always originally been, oh, I just want to be a jazz player and move to New York and do that. And then I was actually thinking of moving to Chicago because I met the trombone professor at DePaul and was thinking of doing my grad work in jazz studies trombone there. But the composition thing had kind of taken hold. And I ended up getting into the artist diploma program at USC for scoring for motion picture and television. Mm-hmm. So we actually came out here, and we've just been here ever since. So that's kind of the story on how we got out here.
Wow. You know, I'm such a visual person. And when you said that your band director said, well, if you know violin, it's going to relate well to trombone, that picture in my head was very clear. And I never had thought about that before.
Yeah, it's very similar because, you know, I tell my students, I say, you know, one of the things with trombone that's different than, you know, your friends who are playing the trumpet or the euphonium or the French horn is, yeah, our lips can be in the wrong place, and that's just something that happens. But if they're holding down their first two fingers, well, it's either the right fingering or the wrong fingering. You know, there's no in between. Whereas trombone is we can kind of be in third position, but we can be wildly out of tune, especially as they get better and they start to progress through middle school into high school, and tuning becomes more of an important element of their playing.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love learning new things like that.
Yeah, it's fun, and that's one of the things that people always ask me, when I see people who I don't know at, if it's the NFA convention or whatever, they'll come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, so you're a flute player?" And most of the time they're really surprised. I'm like, "No, I can't. I took woodwinds class in undergrad as, part of the composition degree, and I couldn't make a sound on a flute. I couldn't get anything out. I remember one finger that A flats, that little key on the side. That's all I remember from that."
Hey, that's a good start.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so
we call that one of our little devils, just because.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, it's just this G sharp key that's sticking out. It's like, not like any of the other keys, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of our little devils.
Yeah. So that's my breadth of knowledge of flute playing right there.
Well, you write beautifully for the flute.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I would not say that that's the only thing you know about flute, because you write very well for the instrument.
Oh, thanks.
So, segueing into that, you do write a lot of pieces for flute. Is that because your wife is a flutist?
It is. Like when we moved out here to LA, I started, I was in the program at USC, and I started doing student films and different films. I've done some feature films. I've done a little bit of ghostwriting here and there and that kind of stuff. But I always still wanted to write concert music. And my wife, like you said, she's a flutist. And really the way I got back into, which kind of, before we were talking about how you never know how your career is going to go as a musician. And it's probably true about any career. But, for us as musicians, we have more of a kind of a thought of how that's going to happen.
Right.
But she's a member of the Los Angeles Flute Orchestra, which is a flute orchestra out here. And they were finishing up. This is years ago. I don't even remember what year this is. In the 2006, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. They were finishing up a CD they were doing, and all the music they didn't have any kind of jazz piece on it. And they had done the recording sessions, and they were like, they wanted one more. So Emily's my wife. She's asked me, she's like, "Well, can you write us a jazz chart?" And so I didn't have much time, so I just actually used one of the pieces I did on my graduation recital, and I arranged it for flute choir. And they had, one of the things, especially back then, that was really unique about the LAFO was they had the big flutes. They had a contrabass flute, a subcontra, the F bass. They had all these big flutes. So I arranged it for the whole thing, and they put it on the album. And some people at the NFA, in the flute community had heard it. And then I didn't even know this happened. They played it in the Kansas City convention years ago, whenever that was, with the professional flute choir at the end of the concert, or the gala concert at the end of the convention, I mean. And after that, I started writing a little bit more for the LAFO, and then other people started playing my works and, asking, "Oh, can we play this?" And then got a few commissions, and then I thought, well, I better start a publishing company because people are doing this more and more. So it just started, just in my little studio here with my printer and just printing out, a couple copies at a time. And then that got a little too much for me to do. And then I was lucky enough a few years ago that Daniel Dorff from Theodore Presser approached me for distribution and taking care of all that stuff. And that's just been wonderful, because now I can just completely think about the creating of the music and not have to think about which is almost sometimes even more work, is the back end of printing the scores, binding them, getting them out, making sure stock is up and all that kind of stuff. So that's, I teach some composition classes, and I'm sometimes asked to speak at, conventions to composers. And a lot of times, one of the questions you always get is what advice do you have to aspiring composers? And one of the things I say is, write what you want to write. That's, of course, we're creative beings. We have to do that. But also from a practical sense, write what's going to be played. If you have friends who are in a saxophone quartet, write some music for saxophone quartet. If you have a friend who's a good violin player, write some solo violin music, because no matter how great you are, if no one hears what you're writing, what does it really matter in the end? It's your music is not going to get out there. And I think for most of us, that's what we want. We want our music to get out there and have a life of its own after it leaves our desk.
Right. Yeah, so then having access to your wife and then her flute community, it's just naturally, well, I'm going to write for this group.
Exactly. And then, I'm probably best known for my flute choir music. That's what sells the most, gets performed the most around the country and even around the world a bit. And then out of that came people asking me to write, whether it's chamber music or solo flute literature or concertos or that. It all kind of came back from that writing for my wife's group and just getting the music out there and people hearing it.
Cool. So how did your sonata for flute and piano come about then?
That was going along the lines of what we were talking about. One of the person who's commissioned me to write 2 pieces for her flute choir was Pam Youngblood at Texas Women's University. And she's an amazing flutist, amazing educator. She's a flute professor there. She's been flute professor, she has been flute professor. So I think it was her 26th year, and she's the head of the music department. And she, for the San Diego convention, she wanted to do a solo performance, and she commissioned me to write this piece for her. And Pam, me and Pam have known each other for a while now. And a lot of times I'll ask her, do you have any extra musical ideas in mind for this piece? And because, one of the flute choir pieces she wanted commissioned, it was when the convention was in New Orleans. And she said, it'd be cool if there was something to do with New Orleans. So I ended up writing a piece called Cajun Sketches, which used some Cajun folk songs in it. And for this, she said, no, not really. She said, I just want a piece for me and Gabriel, her accompanist, to play. And a lot of my music, I use extra musical ideas, whether it's artwork or like in the Cajun Sketches, ideas of landscapes or areas or places. And this one isn't that. This piece has no overt extra musical ideas. I just wanted to write a piece for Pam, and something I try to do is my style is, I think you'd say, or I guess people have said, it's a little bit eclectic. I can kind of do different things. I'm not just kind of dogmatic in my approach to composition. And I really try to write for the players themselves. Like I wrote an alto flute concerto for Peter Sheridan. And for those of you who know him, or for those of you who don't know him, he's a low flute specialist. He lives in Australia, and he's just a dynamo. He plays with such power. And the alto flute concerto I wrote for him is very much like that. It's really powerful. It's, I guess you'd say, aggressive, it's really, you kind of really dig in. And Pam, that's kind of not Pam's style. Pam's a little bit different. She's very virtuosic. She can play all the notes. I know one of the things that drew her to my music originally was kind of the rhythm of it. So I knew she wanted some rhythmic vitality in there in the music, but also I wanted to show the other side, which was like kind of the real lyrical, pretty side that the flute can get. So that was my starting point. The first movement was going to be the slow movement. It was going to be a 2-movement work, and the second movement was going to be much kind of more up tempo with a lot more rhythmic elements in it.
Perfect. I was actually at the premiere at NFA San Diego Festival.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Were you there?
That is very good. I was there. I was actually turning pages for Gabriel, because Gabriel was going to try to do it on his own. And then they, it's like anyone, they were learning the piece, and then it kept getting faster and faster. It was at that tempo, and then Gabriel's like, do you mind turning pages? And I tell people that's I was most afraid, because I've never turned pages before. I'm not a piano player, so I've never done that. And it was so hard not to get caught up in the performance. Yeah. And then I didn't want to not turn a page when I had to. So I was really nervous about that.
Oh, I didn't even put the 2 and 2 together. Yeah. I remember page turner, but I did not think that was you.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of sitting at the back there, hoping, counting, looking at the measures, making sure I turned it on time.
Yeah. It's kind of like, in any flute studio I've been in as a student, we get ready for student, performances and recitals. And the first question is, who's going to be the page turner? And we all sit on our hands. None of us raises our hands, because it's terrifying.
It is. Yeah, you're up there. And because if you don't turn the page, everyone's going to know. They're not They're not blaming the piano player. They're going to blame the page turner.
There's this great clip. I won't drag this out for too long, but there's a great clip of my friend, an oboe friend. He was an undergraduate when I was working on my DMA, and he did a page turning for a recital, and he started to turn the page too soon. And the pianist smacked his hand.
Oh, I can see that happening. Yeah.
He's going to kill me that I'm going to post this, but I have to. It's literally hit over 1 million views or something.
I think I may have seen that a while ago.
Yeah.
I think I do remember seeing that. Yeah.
He has red hair.
Yes, yeah. And she's slapped it, yeah. And, maybe pianists, it's easy for them. They're used to that. But I got to say, it was a little nerve-wracking for me.
Yeah. I don't blame you at all. Oh,
Yeah.
shoot. Yeah, that was a great premiere. And I do love Pam's playing. She is a very beautiful sound. And like you said, those fingers fly. And I'm just like, you go, girl.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing. Yeah. She and I met back in 2010.
Okay.
Yeah. Doing Texas Flute Society things.
Very cool. With all that, she's also just a wonderful person.
My gosh.
That's the thing. So
yeah, she is probably
great.
the most kind, loving person I know. Her heart is just so generous and giving, and you just want to be around her. Yes,
without question. Yeah.
Yeah. Gabriel's awesome too. I played with Gabriel a couple times.
Oh yeah, he's great. As a composer, you hear renditions of your work, and there's many different ones, and sometimes someone will be like, "Oh, I saw your thing on, one of your pieces on YouTube, and I didn't even know it was there." And you listen to it, and it's you get, there's most of the time, I'll say the soloists are really, really great, but sometimes piano players don't hold up. You know what I mean? So when you have someone like Gabriel or the great ones, it's really, it's kind of a blessing to have him there.
Yeah, definitely. So if you'd like to, I don't want to go into too much detail about your part 1, only because I want to use and pick your brain for part 2. But I feel like since I have you and you've carved out time of your busy schedule for us, I don't want to just talk about half of your sonata, because the sonata is only complete with the 2 parts.
Right.
So, and I think it's great because I don't know if there's a performance guide out there for your sonata.
I don't believe there is, no.
Yeah. So I would like to have this resource for the flute community, so that way they can, if they are preparing not only for the competition, but for a recital, to use this as a resource for them when they are preparing the entire sonata.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Cool. So what would you like to say about part 1?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, part 1 is the real showing the lyrical side of the flute. So it opens with this long bass. It's basically cadenza. It's metered out to give the performer a little idea of what I want. It's, in the composition of it, you kind of in your head, you go back and forth, at least I did. Should it be written out as a traditional unmetered, unbarred cadenza? And I thought, I want the player to feel like they have the freedom to take liberties with it, yet I wanted to make sure it stayed within some type of construct of what I wanted. Mm-hmm. So it starts out with just basically a C sharp, and then it goes to harmonic C sharp, an octave higher. And that's really the whole genesis of the piece, kind of spins off that. And, my original idea for the opening was it's basically just a D major 7 sharp 11 chord coming from my jazz background. And then it just starts filling in the notes as it goes through there. And then that continues for a while. And then the piano comes in and then there's just this very simple lyrical melody that the flute plays first in kind of the low register, and it kind of builds up, and then it gets repeated with some development, basically an octave higher. And that kind of goes. And within this movement of the piece, there are some times when the flutist digs in a little bit more, it gets a little bit more aggressive. It's not just all, lyricalness to it. And then it basically, it has just that basic arch form to it, and it kind of ends where it begins after this build up back to this really slow flowing melody with flute and piano.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a really beautiful introduction for sure.
Thanks. Yeah.
I like when harmonics are used in a piece, just because the flute is just known to have all these different colors. And when harmonics are utilized, I think it's just showcasing one of the many colors that, flutes can produce.
I agree. I really love the sound of harmonics on flutes. It's one of the things I'll often be writing something and I'll come out of my studio and I'll ask Emily, I'll say, can a flute do this? And she'll be like, oh, don't write that harmonic. They're not going to like you for that. So I'll be like, okay, I'll figure out another note to have it off of, cause she's like, we can do it on anything, but some just lay better on the instrument. And that's one thing I really try to really do, whether I'm writing for flute, which I do a lot of, or other instruments. I really try to write idiomatically for the instrument so that it lays well. Now it can be very difficult, and some of my things are really notey, and it can be a challenge to play. But I want to make sure there's nothing that's just uncomfortable to play or just feels weird on the instrument. You know what I mean? Like as a trombonist, sometimes you'll have these really difficult passages, and it flows. It feels like, oh yeah. And then you'll have these things that are just a little bit not even nearly as difficult as that, and it just feels awkward. And I try to really avoid that so that never happens to the player.
Yeah, I remember a time when I worked with my friend Christine Kralik, who's a cellist, and we started school together and ended school together, and we were performing and working on this flute cello duet, and I won't name the name because I don't want to bash anybody, but
right.
She had to basically rewrite the cello part.
Yes.
And she said this composer was not thinking about the instrument or the fingerings or just the way it lays out at all. And so her and her professor had to literally almost rewrite the part for it to make sense for the cello.
Yes. Yeah.
So it happens.
It happens all the time. And it's not, a lot of times I'll judge composition competitions and, it's a lot of times high school or maybe early college. And one of the comments I make very often is, this is a wonderful piece. I love where you're going with it. And it sounds great when the computer plays it. But real people are not going to be able to play this. They'll be able to play it, but it will not sound the way you think it's going to sound, and that's something you have to learn as a composer. And it can creep in even for professional composers because you sometimes get so kind of inside the piece that you forget that there's a actual person who's going to have to play these dots you've put on the page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to even kind of go back to what you said about your wife, like, can the flute do this? And I think that's great that you as a composer are very willing and open ears to listen to a flutist's perspective and to say, to pick her brain and say what would work for your instrument. So that's really awesome that you're open to hearing what she has to say.
Yeah, and I always try to do that. I know some composers will go through revision after revision with a soloist. I don't work quite like that. I kind of like just to compose, but I will say I always at least have one question for a performer. Like even I was commissioned to write a flute concerto. Is actually for Pam. She didn't commission me. It was a consortium of schools that commissioned me. And for one of the movements, I sent her it basically based in 3 different key areas. And I said, which one do you want? What feels better for you? Because they all look good to me when I look at them. And she was like, oh, the one that starts on, I can't remember if it was G or C. She's like, that one just lays a lot better. So let's go with that. So, I try to be really cognizant of that and make sure that, sometimes just moving it, a half step or a whole step makes all the difference for the instrument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So any other comments or performer suggestions that you would like to offer the flutist for part 1?
I would just say, and this is something I tell performers all the time, is don't be afraid to make it your own. You know what I mean? If I try to mark in a lot of dynamics, but if you feel that this phrase needs more of a hairpin here, or you want to start it stronger and bring it down, or, you want to play with the tempo a little bit and have a little tenuto here and there, that's great. I love when performers really kind of own the music they're playing and aren't just kind of regurgitating the notes on the page. It's so much more fulfilling, not just as a composer, but as a listener, even to music I've never heard before or music I've heard a million times. When performers, and this is from, high school players to the greatest players in the world, when they really kind of impart their own feeling and their own interpretation of it. It lifts it off the page and it gives it just so much more energy than just the notes themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I bet that's when you composers are definitely almost on cloud nine, because
yes.
I mean, you've been in a room with the door shut and writing this thing out for months, if not however long. And
exactly.
Then to hear it come to life, but then to hear like Joe Schmo do a little something here or Jane Doe do a little something here, like a different interpretation. Yes. I bet you're just like totally, yes. Ecstatic.
Yes, it really makes it worth it. It's like, oh wow. And then even sometimes, I've listened to a piece and someone does something a little unexpected and I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. I'm going to have to, put that in my next piece. I like that idea,
That's awesome. Yeah. So I really like the collaboration that I'm hearing, between you asking your wife and then when it comes to performance, hearing something that you prefer and thinking, oh, maybe I should, add that in. And it's just, I love just what we do.
Yeah. And, one thing I will say, my wife performed this, I think it was last year at a convention here in California, and her accompanist, they did something. The accompanist actually thought of this idea for this opening section when you're playing it with a grand piano with the lid up. She said, oh, Emily, kind of lean into the lid a little bit. And then the harmonics of the strings got picked up by this opening. And it's a really effective device. I'm even thinking when the next pressing of this piece comes out, I may even add a note to do that.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah. See, that's the kind of stuff I like to hear from composers. I mean, because we have access to you now. And for you to say, just looking at the black and white, you don't have that. But then to hear it from the horse's mouth and for you to say, I'm wanting this with the piano lid. I mean, we live off of that as flutists. We need that information. Yeah.
And it wasn't even my idea. It was the pianist's idea. And it's like, yeah, it's a good idea. I think I'm going to keep that.
Nice. So if you would like to, we can move on to part 2.
Great.
Okay. So as I'm practicing this and just getting a feel for the sonata, to be honest, I've played part 2 more than part 1. Mm-hmm. And part 2, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the middle section, I'm hearing some kind of jazz.
There is, yes.
Okay.
Yes, without question.
Okay.
I think as composers, our music is kind of just informed by our experiences.
Yeah.
And, my first experiences seriously with music was as a jazz player, and my first writing for years was just, arranging jazz tunes, writing original jazz tunes and that kind of thing. So it always finds its way into my music, even though, when I'm writing, I'm not thinking necessarily, I want this to be jazzy. I want this section or I want this piece to be jazz based. It's there and it is who I am. And, I had a lesson years ago with Stephen Hartke, who's a composer who I just really admire, one of my favorite composers. And he was looking at a piece of mine. And this was right after we had moved out here. And it was when I was writing, none of my stuff is published from this time. I was, at least in my mind, I thought, to be a serious concert composer, I have to use some type of compositional technique, whether it was set theory or something like that. So I was never really a serialist, but I did definitely use sets and that kind of thing to try to write music. And he listened to the piece and he was like, yeah, this is fine. It's crafted well, but he's like, it doesn't have any personality. It doesn't sound like you. And so then we were kind of talking. He's like, well, do you really like this music? And I'm like, well, I appreciate it, but it's like, or he said, is this what you really hear when you're composing? And I was like, no, not really. And he's like, well, that's what you have to write. And then once I started doing that, and I always tell people, I try not to think when I compose because I don't want to put any preconceived notions in it. You take in all this information from theory to harmony classes to counterpoint to all this stuff. And the way I like to work is it's just kind of all in this pot in my head. And then you just start to write. And of course you're going to follow voice leading and you're going to do this, or you might break some rules, but you know why, you have a reason for it. And just to kind of be much more instinctive when I write. So that's where that came from. I was, the piece was progressing and I thought, I want to go somewhere a little different. And I just kind of heard this more, kind of a little bit bluesy, a little bit jazzy. It has those grace notes in it. And one of the things I would say, we could kind of talk about that section first, because that's kind of the middle of it. And then the front end and the back end both are kind of similar, is my idea for the grace notes in there is almost definitely more scoops, like in jazz, like wah, I don't want it to be like pristine, da-da, I don't want that kind of thing. Like lean into those grace notes and lean through the grace notes into the main note. And the harmony there definitely becomes much more, it's quartal harmony, which isn't just jazz, but a lot of jazz music, that I kind of like, has that kind of quartal harmony in it. And so yes, it definitely has that kind of feel to it. And I would say with that section, I don't think you can, I don't want to say over the top, because, we don't want anything crazy or make it like slapstick kind of thing, but you can really, really milk those notes and really kind of lean into them. And, I've heard sometimes performers even put like just a little bit of like kind of a growl or a flutter tongue on some of those. And it works, if that's kind of what you hear. Now, I tell this to my students when they're doing competitions. It's one thing to do if you're doing a recital and you want to do something new. I don't know if I'd necessarily say do that in a competition if it's not on the page. You know what I mean? But maybe you don't want to go that far. But definitely lean into those notes and kind of really kind of dig in, like I think Pam even said this when we were talking about it. It's much more earthy right there. It's really, because it comes out of this, at the beginning, that's really kind of light, bouncy, notey thing. And that middle section is kind of, it offsets that.
Definitely. I drew a snake in my middle section.
I can totally see that. Yeah.
It was just very slithering. And I love how you describe the grace notes as almost being bends.
Yes.
Yeah. And just, because my husband's a guitarist, like it just almost sounds like a slide.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So going back to the bookcases, the first and the end of your piece, to me, highly spirited and lively, and it has this quirky personality.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. It's very, it's almost cutesy, but then it's not.
Right. No, it is. Because thinking of Pam, I wanted it to be kind of a little, I wanted it to be serious.
Yeah.
But I didn't want it to be too academic, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
I wanted it to have some of that playfulness to it. Most of the phrases go where you think, but then every once in a while, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I didn't kind of expect that to happen there, whether it's harmonically, if it modulates for a few measures somewhere, or it does something rhythmically. It's definitely something I had in my mind as I was writing this movement.
Yeah. I like the rhythmic variety.
I'll say, as we've talked this long about my music, I'm usually not one to like to talk too much about like the music, because I feel like, John Adams and Jennifer Higdon, they're the ones who should be talking about their music. When I talk about my music, it's like, who's this guy talking about his music?
Oh,
what I mean? So I kind of generally try not to do that. But it's that is, I was going for kind of that lightness, that fun. And one of the things I would say kind of marks my music, whether it's flute choir stuff or solo flute stuff or trombone music or whatever, is rhythm. That's one of the first things people always bring up when they talk to me. If it's someone I'm meeting or someone who I've worked with for a long time. They're like, the rhythmic, I always try to have like real rhythmic vitality to the music. Like it's always doing something. It's always evolving. It's always changing. This movement isn't the greatest example of it, but a lot of times performers, I like to use a lot of meter changes in my music, and again, it's kind of for the rhythm, just that kind of the rhythmic diversity you can get by that. So that's one thing that kind of I would say is a little bit of a mark of my music is kind of the rhythmic writing of it, and like even because the beginning, the whole introduction here, up until the main melody comes in at measure 19, is the first 7 notes of kind of that motivic element right there is the first 7 notes of the theme. But what happens is in the beginning here, with the pianist, it gets stretched I'll add a note, I'll add 2 or 3 notes, I'll remove a note. So it's this kind of, my kind of idea was you've come out of this really beautiful movement. The first part, the flute ends on this harmonic, this really kind of nice little gentle chord progression comes down. And then the second movement comes, and it's almost like it's trying to coalesce as it starts to go. And it's you hear this element, then all of a sudden the piano, it's like, oh, they're not together, and then they're out of phase, and then they're in phase, and then like in measure 8, all of a sudden, boom, it all coalesces and they lock right in together. And then it kind of gets into this kind of this, the piano has that ostinato for much of it, bum dum bum ba dum bum ba dum, and it kind of goes, between 6/8 and 2/4 in there to give it a little that variation.
Yeah. Awesome. I love those observations and things that, are on the top of your head just to kind of share with the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other interplay that you would like to mention about, the flute and the piano? Any parts that, might be a red flag for flutists?
Well, I would just say overall in this movement, especially once we get into the main part at measure 19 there, once the theme starts, is just really the staccatos need to be light and bouncy and almost effervescent as they go, and don't get too caught up in the 16th notes, or sometimes they're triplets, or sometimes they're 32nd notes that run up to those. Those are almost, you can almost think of those as kind of throwaways, it's bum 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 bum. That's kind of the part of the theme to get. You don't get too bogged down in bum bum bum, so really let those ascending patterns that happen really take you to those staccato 8th notes, and then really light and bouncy. And again, just we want to impart as much energy into them as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love it when, for example, like measure 29, when you have these accents on these offbeats, that kind of gives it that, fun, highly spirited, and just showing, going back to, the rhythmic comment and just having
right.
that rhythmic dissonance.
Well, it was funny. I was listening to this piece because I'm bad about remembering what I've written, and I'm not even that prolific as of a composer, but I'm always like, when I read or listen to composers talk about, they're like, oh, that piece I wrote in 1975. And I was thinking this is like, I sometimes have trouble remembering what piece I wrote 3 pieces ago, what I was thinking. And I was listening to this the other night, getting ready to chat with you. And, my wife Emily was saying, she's like, those licks kind of, she's like, those sound like, an alto saxophone lick in a jazz solo, bida do bida do ba da do da da da, kind of thing. And I'm sure, that's where it comes from listening to jazz so much and playing it. That's, and it's definitely not overtly jazz, and it's using the same notes. It's not like I'm using some, all of a sudden I go into some, a jazz, whatever that would be, but, because basically this whole melody is just in C Dorian is basically what it is. So, I guess you could say you're playing over C minor 7 chord the whole time.
Yeah.
But, it just comes out, So that's, it's funny you mentioned that, because Emily was like, she was like, oh, that's a cool little section right there. And it almost has that feel of, of a kind of an improvised solo.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's just the character of it. I really was drawn to it.
Mm-hmm. And, that's a good point you bring up. It's funny talking to you. I'm starting to think about more things I thought about while I was doing this piece. The accents in it really, again, I use this word all the time with my students. You can really kind of dig into those and let those inform you kind of the shape of how the phrase should be, whether it's in that section or later on. Sometimes at the end of runs, there'll be an accent. Sometimes there won't. So, take that as you will and do with that with what you want. But that's kind of, where my head was when I was writing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And for the flutists out there, something that I've been noticing when I was practicing this in measure 121, I usually, for my high G flats or my high F sharps in the 3rd octave, I usually use an alternate fingering just because it brings down the pitch. But heads up, that alternate fingering does not work well when you're trying to get to that high B flat, because you need to get to the first trill key. So that's something that I've been having to deprogram myself.
Oh, okay.
and going to the original high G flat fingering just so I can make it to that B flat.
Okay.
And it's probably bad on me that I'm always going to the alternate fingering first, but that's just, I don't know.
It's just what you do.
Yeah, my high G flats are, always sharp. And so that's what I do. So, but it gets me in trouble in measure 121.
Okay. That's interesting. Very cool.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. And I also, the other thing I kind of wanted to point out was in measure 190, I saw myself trying to teach this to a student. And I love these competitions because it opens up your repertoire library. I mean, you get to learn about new composers, new works, new styles. And so just thinking about future programming for students in studio recitals, I saw myself like asking one of my students, Olivia, to maybe take a look at this sonata because I think she would really love it a lot since she's also in the jazz band. And so I kind of envisioned this hypothetical, imaginary conversation happening at 190, like, well, how do you play those, 4 uplets? And for me, it's just, it's a feeling. I mean, I don't know. You can't really, and I've been saying the word watermelon, and that watermelon bum, and that's been helping for me. Right. But yeah, I think that's why I mentioned a couple minutes ago, just that rhythmic variety, things like that at like 190, that's something that stands out.
Yeah, I always, and this goes back to my undergrad composition teacher. One of his sayings was always, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but also it's something I think about daily when I'm writing, is never do something the same way twice. You know what I mean? If you have a phrase that's coming back, change something about it. Change one of the notes, change the rhythm a little bit. Now, obviously, if you're setting up something where it needs to be repeated, obviously I do that all the time. But, it's something that I honestly think about, and it's like, well, what else can I do here to kind of give it just to bring something fresh to it, so it never, my music it's not atonal or academic. It's tonal. I use some non-functional harmony in it, but I always want to make sure that the ear never gets too bored of it, whether it's rhythmically or harmonically. That's something, kind of introduce just something a little different. That's like, oh, it's like refreshing, to the listener.
Yeah, to keep it juicy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Hearing me say that word is just weird, but okay.
It works.
Oh, shoot. Any last comments about your sonata as a wrap up of diving into your composition?
Not really. I would just say, I've said this before. It's a term I use a lot, but just really, you want this to be really lively, like really, really just that rhythmic vitality to it. Just have fun with it. And, just make it bouncy. There's a little bit of everything. There's some parts where we dig in a little bit more. There's a lot of kind of light, effervescent type of bouncy parts. Just, have fun with it. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just making it your own and making something musical with it.
Yeah, and I think it's great just going back to what you said earlier about your composition professor and saying, and him guiding you and mentoring you and saying, is this music that you're excited about? Is this what's really in your head? And when you were honest with yourself, you said, no, not really.
It's not really that. Exactly.
Yeah, yes. And so for you to say, this is fun and energetic music, have fun with it, it's alive, that just goes to show you back to that comment, like from this short hour talking with you, you seem like a really fun, energetic guy. And so only makes sense that you would write music that would reflect that.
Well, yeah, it's maybe some people who know me might not say that, but it's in this piece, that's what I was going for at least.
Oh, shoot. But you have to be true to yourself.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So in the last segment of the show, I do a portion called picks. Do you have a pick for the listeners?
A pick for the listeners?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this is something I stumbled across probably about 1.5 years ago, but it's something that's stuck with me. It's, I'm sure we all have these musical moments in our lives where we've heard something. We've heard, for me, I guess it's a piece. For some people, it might be a performance of a piece they've heard a million times that really stick out, that really kind of, you kind of are like milestones. And it's a piece by Caroline Shaw, her Partita. And it's a piece I know a lot of people who I've brought this attention to don't know it. A lot of composers know Caroline Shaw. She's an amazing composer. But a lot of like performers who I bring this up, a lot of people, a lot of flute people I know, they've never heard of her or this piece. And it truly is like, I remember when I heard it, I thought this is the best piece I've heard in the last 10 years. And it's her Partita, and it's for 8 solo voices. There's a performance of it on YouTube. It's recorded as well, but it's Caroline Shaw's Partita, and it's just it blew me away when I first heard it. So I always, when people kind of ask, like, oh, what are you listening to, or we get into discussions about, kind of things that have, grabbed us. That's something I always bring up to people, and I would really suggest everyone to check that out. It's and I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of vocal music. It's not my first thing. But this piece is just her writing. The performances are great, obviously. But the writing, the sound she gets from just the human voice, it's one of those pieces, like, in 40 years of somewhere, like, well, what are the pieces that like stick with you? That's one of the ones that's going to, that will definitely be on that list. And it's a piece I try to listen to a lot. It's like I said, I've never written vocal music. I don't know if I ever will, but regardless of that, the piece is just that incredible. I really would encourage everyone to check that out.
Cool. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, she uses some, and again, the singers are amazing because like she uses some Tuvan throat singing in it. There's a lot of spoken word things. There's these aleatoric passages. At least I'm assuming they're aleatoric passages. I've never seen a score of it, but just the way it is, I'm assuming it's aleatoric. It's it's wonderful. It's really, it really is a great piece.
Cool. I can't wait to check it out.
Yeah.
I actually have 3 picks today, and I'm not trying to be real, whatever you want to call it, but it's because the last 2 episodes, we haven't been able to do picks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've had this list,
Very cool.
We've had technical difficulties. We've had all sorts of stuff. So this is like a phone call that's going great. So I might as well use the time.
Exactly. Get them in.
Yeah. Okay. The first one is Leonard Bernstein's essay titled The Mountain Disappears. And I got it from Audible. I used a credit. I guess I didn't have to because there's a website that offers it for free. So I will put a link in the show notes for that. It's a great, but I will say the Audible version is Bernstein's voice.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So that was cool. Really neat to hear it from the author, and it's Bernstein. I mean, you can't get any better than that.
I know.
Yeah. I have a friend, Tara, who says that she would cut off her right arm just to play under his baton just one time. If only he could come back, from the grave and, do that all over again. She says, I would give up my right arm. I'm like, okay.
That's funny because I love Bernstein. I have a picture of him in my writing studio here. Yeah. And I'm just I remember when I read his biography, I'm just a huge Bernstein fan.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
It was meant to be then.
Exactly.
The second is a book by Jack London. It's an oldie but a goodie, The Call of the Wild. Yeah, when I was in high school, and they quote unquote forced you to read literature. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do in school, but you don't really appreciate it. And when you become an adult, you look back at these classics and you're like, oh my goodness, where have I been this whole time? And my third pick is to please, if you use Nespresso, to consider recycling your pods. Nespresso offers recycling bags for free at no cost to you. So you can go online and then just order these Nespresso recycling bags and fill it up, and it's already pre-labeled to send via UPS.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
Yeah. So those are my 3 picks.
Cool. Those are great. I'm going to have to definitely check out the Bernstein essay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your time, energy, talents. And I can't thank you enough for your time and just giving useful information to the flute community. We all so very much appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much, Heidi. It was truly my honor to be on your podcast. It was great. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And I sure hope we get to meet at the next convention. And this time, if you're the page turner, I will come up and introduce myself so that way we can officially meet.
Yeah, we're planning to be in Salt Lake, so maybe we can meet there. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you, Peter, and have a great day.
Excellent. You too. Have a great day, Heidi.
Bye-bye. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.